Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a locked room on a rain-slick night in Newport, Rhode Island, 1868, where time doesn't pass so much as circle. You stand at the threshold, hand on a brass knob gone cold from secrets. The gaslight hisses before you step inside. Hear this, you might not survive this. Before you dive deeper into this chilling truth, consider hitting like and subscribing, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with the time and place you're watching, so I know you're still out there. And we'll dive into tonight's journey together. You push the door. The hinges complain. A thin animal sound. Two girls sit beyond a velvet rope that once meant parties, Clara and Isolde Harrington. Their faces are porcelain, their pupils still water. The physician's ledger swears they should be 30 by now. Their skin disagrees. You circle them like an archivist circling a relic, searching for the crack that proves it's human. A metronome ticks on the mantle, and with each click, you feel the room choosing a single second and nailing it to the wall. No dust floats in the lamplight. No breath fogs the pain. Outside, the harbor bell counts wrong hours. Somewhere, gulls fall silent. A mirror across from you returns your shape, but not theirs. You realize they are angled just so, to avoid reflections, to avoid the arithmetic of truth. Somewhere beneath your boots, a pipe hums like machinery learning to mimic prayer. Who arranged this? Who benefits from a beauty that never bruises? You reach for Clara's wrist, not to touch, only to measure the distance between belief and evidence. Her eyes slide to you, slow as a clock's hand, and then stop. Whatever keeps them perfect is awake and listening. You wander deeper into the memory of Newport, Rhode Island, 1860s, when the sea smelled of tar and salt, and fortunes were carved from waves that drowned countless men. The Harrington name glowed on brass plaques and ledger books. A dynasty of shipping wealth built by Silas Harrington, a man who clawed his way up from dockside grit into Beacon Street parlors. You taste the ambition that drove him, sharp as rust on your tongue. Silas was not a man shaped by kindness. He was carved by loss. His wife, Eleanor, fell to a fever in a matter of days. You picture her body shrouded in white, the mirrors in the Harrington home covered with black cloth, the air heavy with burning sage meant to ward off contagion. Silas stood at her bedside and felt the world betray him. You can almost hear his whisper at her grave, never again. That vow became his compass, and every decision afterward bent toward defeating death itself. His daughters Clara, the elder by 1 year, and Isolde, gentle and quiet, were no longer just children. They became treasures to be guarded like crown jewels. You watch Silas transform the family mansion into a fortress of velvet isolation. Tutors were imported, physicians retained, servants trained not to serve but to watch. The girls never walked Newport's harbor or felt the ocean spray without a veil across their faces. Even their laughter seemed rationed, parceled out under their father's anxious gaze. You notice the contradictions. Clara's eyes, sharp and questioning, darted to every locked cabinet in the library. Isolde's sketchbooks filled with drawings of birds, rivers, Open fields, the very things denied to her. They dreamed outward while their father pulled them inward. The richer the Harringtons became, the smaller their daughter's world grew. Silas surrounded himself with men who whispered of cures. You sense the desperation in his dealings letters arriving from Europe, marked with crimson seals, promising secrets from universities that did not exist. Boxes arrived in the dead of night, containing powders that smelled of ash, instruments that gleamed like surgical tools but etched with symbols no surgeon used. You imagine him alone at his desk, tracing diagrams by candlelight, his fingers smudged with ink and trembling with a faith that felt more like madness. You see how society indulged him. Newport's elite loved the spectacle of two pale, beautiful sisters kept in a gilded cage. They were paraded at carefully managed dinners, admired for their grace, whispered about for their fragility. Some called them angels, others dolls. Few asked why they always wore gloves, why their voices never changed with age. To question Silas Harrington was to question the very coin that funded the city's prosperity. You walk the hallways of their mansion in your mind, velvet curtains suffocating sunlight, a conservatory where orchids bloomed under glass while the sisters withered in stillness, a chapel-like study where Silas prayed not to God, but to the alchemy of men who promised permanence. Every corner seems frozen, as though time itself was already being bent by his will. And beneath it all, you sense something darker, a transaction waiting to be made. Love had curdled into possession. Fear had transformed into obsession. What Silas wanted was not to keep his daughters alive, but to keep them unchanged, untouchable, eternally his. You hear the silence in that house and realize it is not mourning, it is incubation. Something unnatural is being nurtured there. You stand at the edge of their world and understand this is not a family simply scarred by grief. This is a man preparing to bargain with whatever darkness will answer. You remember the spring of 1868 as a season where the rain refused to leave Newport's cobblestones. It clung to the air, to the glass panes of the Harrington mansion, and to the lungs of Clara and Isolde. First came the cough, soft at first, like a clearing of the throat, then sharper, tearing. You watched Clara double over, blood speckling her handkerchief. Isolde followed within days, her pale cheeks drained to a waxen sheen. Fever glazed their eyes, and the sisters who had been paraded like porcelain now seemed destined to shatter. Silas would not allow it. You saw him dismiss the physicians who named the disease consumption. He barred Dr. Mallory, their family doctor, from entering the sick room. Mallory protested, begged to apply poultices, to bleed them, to try quinine, but Silas's rage flared like a lantern. You speak of endings, he spat. I speak of preservation. You stood at the doorway and understood he was not trying to save them from death, but from change itself. For 3 nights, the mansion grew restless. Servants whispered of a carriage arriving at midnight, its wheels muffled, its driver faceless. You caught the glint of lantern light through the fog as a tall, angular man emerged, carrying an iron box clasped tight with locks. No crest marked the carriage. No name was spoken. Only silence followed him as he entered Silas's study. From the crack beneath the door, you smelled strange smoke resin, herbs, something metallic. Hours stretched. At dawn, the man departed with the same measured stride, his unblinking eyes fixed on nothing. The air he left behind felt colder, as if winter itself had been invited inside. When at last you entered the sisters' chambers, you felt a shock crawl your spine. The fever was gone. Their cheeks glowed, their skin luminous. They rose from their beds as if death had been nothing but a passing dream. Clara's lips curved in a smile, too practiced, too serene. Isolde held your hand, but her touch was cool, unyielding. You tried to rejoice, but their eyes betrayed them. Something behind the pupils had stilled, like a river frozen mid-current. Silas called it a miracle. He pressed gold into the hands of departing physicians, dismissed the household staff who had seen too much, and declared his daughters restored. You knew better. You had not witnessed recovery. You had witnessed an exchange. The days that followed proved it. Clara laughed at a joke you had heard her tell years ago, word for word, with the same timing. Isolde painted flowers, but each sketch was identical to the one before, as though her memory had been pinned in place. You tried to speak of the future marriage, travel, the passing of years, but they stared blankly, their smiles unbroken masks. The future is today, Clara said, her tone calm, rehearsed, eternal. Outside the mansion, Newport whispered. A maid who had been dismissed told you of the man with the iron box. She swore she saw the sisters sit upright in bed, eyes open but unblinking, for hours at a time, as though waiting for a command. The story slithered through taverns and parlors. The Harrington Sisters never coughed again, never tired, never changed. They were too perfect. But perfection has a cost. You noticed the disappearances first among the dock workers, young men who never returned home from night shifts. Then the laundress who vanished while delivering linens to the Harrington estate. Their names were never printed in newspapers, their families silenced by coin or fear. You traced the pattern, each absence a thread leading back to the mansion on the hill. At night, you dreamed of the iron box. You imagined it opening, revealing not medicine, but something alive, something that sang a sound too low for human ears. You woke with the echo in your bones, the feeling that the sisters' beauty was fed by a hunger that did not sleep. You watched Silas pacing his study, shadows bending around him, his notes filled with circles devouring themselves, serpents biting tails, diagrams of vessels and bloom. He muttered of permanence, of conquering entropy. But you knew he had already crossed a line. He had traded not just money, but flesh and time. One evening you found Isolde alone in the conservatory. The orchids around her drooped, their roots blackened. She sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. When you whispered her name, she turned to you with a flicker, just a flicker of terror breaking through the porcelain calm. "He watches," she murmured, her voice papery thin, "always." Then the mask returned. You realized The horror. Then Clara and Isolde were not saved. They were trapped. Their bodies gleamed, but their souls looped endlessly, pinned like butterflies under glass. Their father had not given them life, he had stolen their becoming. And you, standing in that house, felt the weight of a question that burned like fever. What had been fed to keep them whole? And how much more would be required? You mark the passing years not by seasons, but by the faces that vanish. A dockhand here, a seamstress there, whole families leaving their cottages with lamps still burning inside. At first, you tell yourself Newport is a port town, people drift away, swallowed by sea or hunger. But the pattern sharpens until denial becomes impossible. Every name lost is young, strong, vital. Every trail winds back to the hill where the Harrington mansion sits cloaked in gaslight. Clara and Isolde appear radiant, unchanged. You see them step into society parlors, their gowns 5 years out of fashion, yet their skin flawless. Guests whisper, trying not to stare. Some mutter admiration, others recoil. The sisters smile with the serenity of wax figures, their laughter echoing the same inflection you remember from a decade earlier. Each word they speak feels rehearsed, as though memory has ossified in their throats. You begin to see them less as daughters and more as exhibits. Newport's elite invite them not out of affection but curiosity, the way one might display a fossil. They attend salons, but their conversations never deepen. They dance, but their steps repeat with mechanical precision. Friends of their youth marry, bear children, wrinkle with time. Clara and Isolde remain frozen. Dolls who do not blush, who never stumble, but behind the spectacle lies blood. You walk the piers at dawn and find stains slicking the planks where no fish was gutted. A tangle of hair snared in a nail, a boot without its wearer. The constable shrugs, records misplaced, reports silenced. You understand. Money oils the gears of disappearance. The Harrington fortune buys silence as easily as coal. One night, as fog smothers the harbor, you see it with your own eyes. A carriage without crest, wheels muffled, arrives at the servants' gate. 2 men drag a limp figure from the shadows, a young sailor still breathing. You watch his chest rise and fall before he is hauled inside. The next morning, Clara glides through the garden, her cheeks unnaturally flushed. The sailor is never seen again. Your suspicion turns to dread when Martha, the dismissed maid, confides in you. She tells you of a basement room barred by iron, of glass tubes humming with pale fluid that pulsed like a second heartbeat, of Clara and Isolde seated before the machine, still as statues, while something unseen siphoned through the tubes. Martha swore she heard faint singing high, trembling notes, not human, not earthly. After that night, she fled, refusing her pension, choosing poverty over silence. You test her story, breaking into the garden conservatory. You find soil blackened as though scorched from beneath. The orchids crumble at your touch. And there, etched faintly on the marble bench, you see a mark a serpent consuming its own tail, coiled tight around a blooming lotus. The same symbol Clara once pressed into your palm. A warning? Society begins to turn. Where once the Harrington sisters were adored, they now inspire unease. Invitations dwindle, rumors multiply. At balls, you hear the whispers. They never age. They dress as if the calendar stopped. What does Silas feed them? What was fascination becomes horror. The mansion transforms into a mausoleum of the living. Silas himself grows gaunt, eyes ringed, hands trembling. You watch him prowl the hallways like a guard dog, snapping at questions, clutching ledgers no one else may read. His fortune continues to swell, but his presence withers. The only things that thrive are his daughters, untouched, untouchable. Then the vanishings intensify. Children vanish from fishing shacks. A young bride disappears on the eve of her wedding. A minister's son never returns from delivering sermons to the poor. The city bristles, but no one dares confront Silas openly. Fear seeps into every household. Doors lock earlier. Mothers clutch children tighter. But always, the mansion glows with lamplight. Clara and Isolde framed in its windows like saints in glass. You begin to dream their silence. In those dreams, the sisters stand at the foot of your bed, identical smiles carved into their faces. You wake to find your watch stopped, the hour hand frozen at midnight. Each morning, the birds near your window grow quieter, until one day there is only silence. And then you see it, the girls no longer merely still, but vacant. You catch Clara sitting in the conservatory for hours without moving, not even to blink. When you whisper her name, she turns, but her gaze slides through you as if she is watching something behind your shoulder. Isolde sketches the same flower endlessly, never finishing, never beginning. Their humanity has not been preserved, it has been consumed. You realize the horror is no longer hidden. It spills into Newport streets. The disappearances are the true price of perfection. Every breath the sisters draw is stolen from someone else. You feel the city itself being drained. Vitality siphoned into two bodies that should have long since grown old. And you ask yourself, as the fog curls around the mansion gates, how long before it is your turn? You know you cannot keep silent anymore. The whispers, the vanishings, the cold eyes of the Harrington sisters, every sign points to a truth rotting beneath Newport's polished surface. You begin to follow the trail, the way a hunter follows blood in the snow. Dr. Edward Mallory becomes your ally. He carries himself like a man already marked by failure. Dismissed from the Harrington household, yet unwilling to abandon the girls he once treated. In his journal's pages, he lets you read by candlelight. You see the scribbled descent of a man into obsession. He writes of tubes that pulsed with light, of a basement where the air carried the stench of iron and mildew. He writes of the sound, faint but constant, like a bird's song trapped in a machine. You press him for details, and Mallory finally confesses what he witnessed before Silas cast him out. He had followed the tall stranger with the iron box one night and saw Silas unlock a hidden door beneath the mansion. Inside, he glimpsed glass cylinders glowing faintly blue, and between them, a frail figure seated in shadow. The man's face was obscured, but his body was twisted, withered, as though a century had passed through him in a single decade. Mallory swears he heard him whisper Clara's name. You find Martha again, the maid who fled. She hides in a fisherman's shack at the edge of town, her hair unkempt, her hands shaking. She swears she cannot sleep for fear of hearing that song again, the one she calls the Nightingale's Lament. She tells you the sisters would sit for hours unmoving, as if their bodies were tethered to some unseen current flowing from beneath the earth. She describes Silas counting coins while his daughters watched, unblinking, like acolytes at an altar, but every clue you gather begins to rot in your hands. Constables who once promised to investigate lose their resolve. Reports vanish from drawers. A clerk who dared question Silas is found floating in the harbor, face pale, eyes open. You realize the Harrington fortune is more than wealth, it is a shield, deflecting every attempt at justice. One evening, you gather your courage and enter the mansion uninvited. You slip past servants who pretend not to see. In the study, you find ledgers filled not with trade records, but with lists of names, dozens, perhaps hundreds, dockhands, seamstresses, beggars. Every name has a date beside it, and every date coincides with the disappearance of someone from Newport's poorest quarters. You trace the columns until your hand trembles. Each life accounted for, like coin spent. The house itself begins to betray secrets. You descend a narrow staircase at the rear, your lantern's flame guttering. The air grows colder, damp with the breath of stone. At the bottom, you find a chamber carved into the earth. There are machines here, brass and glass, humming with a low vibration that rattles your teeth. Tubes run along the walls, filled with liquid that glows faintly, pulsing in rhythm with something alive. In the center is the iron box, smaller than you imagined. Its lid etched with symbols that coil and twist. You reach for it, but a sound halts you, a bird song, faint yet piercing, as though the air itself is trembling. The notes cut through you, freezing your muscles, pinning you in place. Only when the song fades do you collapse against the wall, shaking. You understand now, this is no metaphor. Something living has been bound into this process, its voice the key to stilling or animating the flesh of others. You barely escape before Silas returns, your lantern nearly extinguished. That night, you and Mallory piece together what you have seen. His voice shakes as he admits the unthinkable. The sisters' vitality is fed by another's decay. The ledger's names, the disappearances, they are not random tragedies. They are sacrifices, fuel for a system of stolen permanence. Still, you cannot bring proof to light. The city is sewn shut with bribes. Newspapers print glowing profiles of Silas as a benefactor, praising his unwavering devotion to his daughters. Meanwhile, mothers weep for sons who never came home, and the sisters smile serenely from behind carriage windows. As though nothing has changed, the investigation becomes your own haunting. You pore over Mallory's journals, over Clara's cryptic sketches of serpents and flowers, over the faded letters from Europe. Each piece fits into a puzzle you do not want to see completed. You find references to a society of men calling themselves the Ebon Fellowship, whose aim is not wealth or politics, but conquest of time itself. Silas is not alone. He is only one member of a circle that spans further than Newport's harbor. At times, you doubt yourself. You hear the bird's song in your dreams, wake with your limbs frozen, your heart pounding as though something has siphoned your strength in the night. You wonder if you, too, are tethered now, drawn into the machine that hums beneath the mansion. And yet, you persist. You gather testimonies from widows, from children who saw men in gray coats dragging neighbors away. You note the dates, the places, the patterns, but with every step closer to the truth, you feel eyes on you. Men loiter near your door. A letter arrives without signature. Stop digging, or you will be next. Still, you cannot stop, because the image of Clara in the conservatory burns in your mind, the flicker of terror that broke through her porcelain mask. She is trapped, alive, but not living, and she begged with her eyes for someone to see her prison. You realize the sisters are not just symbols of a father's obsession. They are prisoners of a machine that feeds on the city itself. And you, unwilling though you are, have become their witness, their investigator, their confessor. Now, you must ask yourself, how much longer can you keep following these threads before they strangle you too? You return to Mallory's cramped quarters, your pockets heavy with stolen notes and trembling sketches. For weeks you have pursued shadows, but tonight the shadows arrange themselves into a shape too terrible to ignore. You spread the papers across the table, Clara's serpent circling a lotus, the ledgers of vanished names, the faint diagram scrawled in Silas's hand. At the center, always, is the question you've tried to avoid. Where does the glow come from? Who is the true source? The answer emerges like rot bleeding through wallpaper. Mallory tells you of a patient record he found, misfiled in a charity hospital. The name was Jonathan Harrington, Silas's firstborn son, long thought dead of a childhood illness. But the date of death doesn't align. The boy should have been buried years before the sisters fell sick. And yet his name reappears, connected to deliveries made to the Harrington estate. You recall whispers of a figure seated in shadow, body withered, eyes burning. You remember Martha describing a locked chamber, the smell of decay wrapped in iron. And you understand Jonathan never died. He was hidden. He is the vessel. You force yourself back into the mansion one last time. You descend the same iron staircase, the air thick with mildew and dread. There, behind a locked grate, you find him. Jonathan Harrington. Though what remains barely deserves the name. His limbs are thin sticks, his skin parchment, his chest rising and shallow. Painful gasps, tubes pierce his flesh, carrying the luminous fluid into the brass machine. And his eyes are alive, ancient, terrified. He cannot speak, but his gaze pierces you, pleading. You see in him not a monster, but a sacrifice. His father's devotion to his daughters was built on the slow consumption of his son. Every radiant smile from Clara, Every serene glance from Isolde has been paid for by Jonathan's endless dying. You stagger back, bile rising in your throat. The truth is more monstrous than any rumor. Silas has turned his own blood into a battery. The Harrington sisters are not miracles. They are parasites bound to the suffering of their brother. Mallory confirms it later, voice shaking as he translates fragments from a book whispered about among occult physicians. Somnus infinitum, the endless sleep. It describes a process of stasis, permanence bought through constant transfer of vitality. The vessel must be young, brimming with bloom, then bound to the machine until his essence is drained drop by drop. Silas had the perfect candidate, his firstborn son, hidden from society, declared dead to all but those who profited from his torment. You begin to see the wider pattern. The ledgers of missing dockworkers were not aberrations. They were supplements. Offerings fed into the machine when Jonathan's body faltered. Newport's poor were harvested like firewood to keep the glow steady. Silas was not working alone. Mallory whispers the name you had glimpsed before the Ebon Fellowship. Wealthy men, united not by greed, but terror. Terror of loss, of aging, of death. They pooled their resources, built their experiments in basements, funded societies that cloaked their true work. You recall the stranger with the iron box. He was no doctor. He was an emissary of the fellowship, carrying the nightingale whose song locked the sisters in place. That song is still in your bones, a vibration you cannot shake. It was the sound of a prison closing, not opening. Now, the horror settles fully. Clara and Isolde are not alive as you know life. They are frozen minds, looping endlessly, trapped in a single season. You think of Clara's words in the conservatory. The future is today. She wasn't being poetic. She was describing her cage. Their beauty is not a gift. It is evidence of theft, of a brother's stolen years. You try to imagine Silas's reasoning. Was it grief that drove him, or envy? Did he look at Jonathan, fragile but brilliant, and see only a resource to be consumed? Did he convince himself that one child must be sacrificed for the survival of the others? Or was it always about power, proving that he, Silas Harrington, could outwit the laws of nature and bend them to his will? The more you think on it, the less you can tell where grief ends and hunger begins, and so the truth becomes unbearable. Newport's eternal debutantes are not blessed, they are cursed. Their smiles are bought with the agony of their own brother, entombed beneath their feet. The disappearances, the vanishings, the silenced witnesses, all fuel for the machine of permanence. You look back on every encounter with them differently now. The stillness, the placid calm, the flicker of terror in Isolde's eyes, all of it cries out for recognition. They are prisoners of their father's bargain. They are unwilling accomplices in a crime that has consumed more than just strangers, it has consumed their own kin. The fellowship's reach explains the silence of officials, the blindness of constables, the vanishing of reports. It was never about the Harringtons alone. They were one case study, one grotesque experiment in a larger project to conquer death. And Newport, with its wealth and its shadows, became their laboratory. When you leave the mansion that night, you feel the weight of Jonathan's gaze following you. You know you cannot free him, not without tearing down the entire edifice. But you also know this truth cannot remain hidden. You carry it with you. A sickness of the soul, the knowledge that beauty, wealth, and permanence in this city are built on the bones of the forgotten. And as you walk the fog-draped streets, you cannot shake the final question. Jonathan's eyes asked of you, will you expose this? Or will you let me wither until there is nothing left? You carry the truth like a lantern whose light only blinds you to everything else. Days bleed into weeks, and Newport continues its masquerade. Ships dock, coins change hands, church bells ring, but you know the city's pulse is false, that its lifeblood is drained below the Harrington mansion. Then one winter's night, fire tears across the hill. Flames roar out the conservatory windows, painting the harbor red. Townsfolk gather, staring as the mansion collapses into its own foundation. Official reports call it an accident in the boiler room. You know better. Silas Harrington is declared dead. Clara and Isolde are said to have perished in the blaze. Yet when the ash cools, there are no bones, no teeth, not even fragments of porcelain flesh. The city sighs relief, eager to close the ledger on its most disturbing family. You linger at the ruins and find something others overlooked: twisted iron, charred but intact, the outline of a small cage. Inside the ash, you see clockwork gears fused into slag, not a bird cage, but a machine designed to ignite. The sisters did not simply burn. They tried to destroy their prison, to end themselves before the fellowship could reclaim them. Whether they succeeded or were spirited away, you cannot know. Dr. Mallory vanishes weeks later, his journals confiscated, his name stricken from society registers. Martha is found drowned at the edge of Goat Island. Her death ruled a misstep. One by one, those who spoke vanish or are erased. You remain, haunted, holding fragments of sketches, ledgers, and Jonathan's gaze that night in the cellar. Years pass, and the Harrington estate becomes legend. Parents warn children, stray too close to the ruins, and the Eternal Sisters will take you. Tourists whisper about dolls that never age. Still wandering, the Ebon Fellowship sheds its old name and resurfaces as charitable trusts, research institutes, endowments. The machine adapts, hides in plain sight. And you are left with questions that claw at your nights. Did the sisters burn, finally free in their own ashes, or are they hidden, silenced in some deeper vault, waiting for a song to wake them again? What of Jonathan? The withered prince, was his torment ended, or does his breath still rattle in some secret chamber? You stand before the ruins and realize the investigation is no longer about Newport. It is about the world itself. How many other Harrington mansions stand cloaked in gaslight, guarded by wealth, hiding unaging faces within? Ask you, because by hearing this, you've joined me in the silence they tried to bury. If one night you woke to find Clara and Isolde smiling from the foot of your bed, untouched by time, their porcelain eyes fixed on you, would you scream, or would you listen before you click away? Know this: their story spreads because of you. keep the flame alive. Share this tale. Subscribe if you dare. And comment below with where you're watching from, so we'll know who's still out there, who hasn't been erased yet.